Not fun, not very F1-like, and anti-racing. Max Verstappen's thrown a grenade on F1's new 2026 rules in the middle of testing. John Noble, you were there. Why does Max hate these cars?
It was a fascinating press conference today. Just 24 hours after Mercedes boss Toto Wolff labelled Red Bull the benchmark, basically said Max Verstappen looks, game on for the championship. The Red Bull energy deployment is great. So you thought, well, we'll go to a press conference and Max is surely going to say, actually, yeah, these rules are quite good, I'm quite enjoying it. Complete opposite. I've not witnessed someone be so critical of a regulation set like this in his position. As you said, anti-racing, not a lot of fun, to be honest, he said. It feels like FE on steroids. The racing's less pure. It's not F1. He says maybe it's just better to drive in Formula E. It's just not fun. So this was about energy deployment, basically. He doesn't like the fact they're having to lift and coast. Doesn't like the fact they're having to manage energy. Doesn't feel like proper racing. He just wants to drive a normal racing car as traditionally he has done in Formula 1.
It's the closest we've come so far to the situation we had when the turbo hybrids first came in 2014, and Sebastian Vettel, the reigning world champion, dominant, very critical about different aspects of it, the competitiveness of the new formula, the noise of the new formula, and so on and so forth. Hasn't quite reached sort of widespread critical mass in the way that was, but it's a sort of move in that direction. We're going to come on to a bit more on that in a moment. But Max obviously tying this, interestingly, to his own future too. Now, this is a topic that won't really disappear, and he's mentioned a few times he's unhappy with various elements about Formula One, including the rules direction, and he was asked about that, wasn't he, in the media session, and made it pretty clear where he stands.
Yeah, we've had this message from a lot of drivers saying, I don't particularly like these 2026 regulations, but any driver that's winning is going to love them. Lance Stroll told us on Monday, if George Russell wins the Australian Grand Prix by 30 seconds, he's going to say these rules are great. So you would expect Max to say, yeah, actually they're fine, but not at all. There's the lack of fun, and he said even to him, a winning car's not enough. It's got to be fun. And he was asked a question about, well, what does this mean for your future? You've made clear you'll only continue to stay in Formula One if it is fun. And he said, well, it's obvious I'm considering other options outside of Formula One where I can have some fun, one of which could be the Nordschleife 24 hours, for example. So he's clearly unhappy with things, and it was quite interesting. He said, look, I understand my team's made a lot of effort. We've put a lot of work into Red Bull powertrains. I know I'm going to make some people unhappy making these criticisms, but he says he has the right to be critical if he's not happy, and he's not happy.
Well, let's get into a little bit more detail about that stuff that makes him unhappy, because you're right, it's all about the way that the engines work within this, and this has been a talking point for so long with these rules, the need to make the cars and the sporting regulations sort of twisted around these 50-50 or nearly 50-50 engines between internal combustion engine and electric power. So you've got this massive emphasis on recharging, whether that is the lift and coast, the weird downshifting, high revving, other tactics that teams and engine manufacturers have been working out, and drivers basically have to drive a certain way to do that. And basically, like, he has a pretty good chance of being fast in these rule sets because he's Max Verstappen, and also because it looks like Red Bull's done a good job, but he clearly doesn't like the way that the being fast is done in these cars. But how much of a point does he have? Are these rules terrible? Are they doomed from the outset?
I think there are two issues, or two kind of conflicting thoughts with these cars. On the one hand, there's a ton of power. We've got 1,000 horsepower, which is what F1 cars should be, and a lot of acceleration. We've seen the cars sliding a lot, coming out of corners, which is good. The problem is, and this has been an issue we've known for years, they're energy starved. There isn't enough energy to run that maximum power out of corners. And I think what's hit home, not only to Max, but a couple of other drivers, is just the tactics that are needed to be quick. So it's no longer a case, as it's been in Formula One for decades, that the driver that can effectively brake later into a corner, take that corner faster than another driver, get on the throttle earlier and come out quicker is the best. Now you can be quicker by lifting off and lift and coasting for an extra 200 meters, which gives you more battery power. It's a completely different way of racing, and for drivers like Max, it's not fun.
The one thing that is probably worth stressing is that a track like this, there are massive opportunities to charge the battery, so it doesn't surprise me that teams are trying to do that and exploit that as much as possible with the long straights and then the big braking zones. But also those long straights mean you are then deploying a lot more than you would on a conventional track, let's say, or certainly a track like Monaco. But the problem is that it's not the first driver to sort of break rank a little bit from the kind of veneer of the excitement and new 2026 rules. Lewis Hamilton's talked about it as well. So it's interesting that some cracks are starting to show.
Yeah, we had the first hints of that last week. Obviously, the Barcelona test was closed. Everything was very controlled by Formula One. All the interviews effectively were done by Formula One people. The questions weren't very probing on the regulations, what was good, what was bad. But since then, we've spoken to some drivers. Esteban Ocon talks about following not being so easy. We got the first hints of this kind of lift and coast thing being a bit strange. And then you spoke to Lewis Hamilton yesterday. You were at his press conference. He was equally not so delighted, despite Barcelona having appeared to be quite positive.
Yeah, and he stands by that in terms of the cars being sort of more fun to drive. They move around a bit more. Max doesn't seem to like the fact that they're less grip, but a lot of other drivers are actually quite positive about that. They are smaller. Smaller always looks better and faster on track. So I think all of that stuff is valid. It's the engine side of things. Lewis stands by his comments that the cars are more fun, but he doesn't like the fact that he's saying they're doing like 600 metres of lift and coast around a qualifying lap. He said that that's not racing. He said none of the fans will understand it because it's ridiculously complex and you need a degree to understand it all. We've obviously been digging into various details about that, including, for example, the race starts and all the stuff going on there. It is fair to say it's a very complicated rule set once you start digging into the details.
Yeah, we found out lots more about these regulations. And race starts, for example, used to be just needed to balance the revs at the right point, put your clutch in, find the bite point, bang, go. Now you need to spool the turbo up for 10 seconds so the turbo's running at the right speed. You need to balance that against battery demands, so the battery power will increase, but you can't hit peak power because it's detrimental to performance. You need to get the right revs as well then for the getaway, but you can't use your battery until you hit 50 kilometers an hour. It's now triggered a safety debate about these starts are maybe too difficult, maybe there's going to be too many slow starts, which opens the risk of crashes off the grid. So there's lots of complexity coming in, there's lots of debate happening, and I think the reason the cracks are appearing now is that drivers are starting to push the performance. They're realising where things are going. Barcelona was about mileage, it's about understanding how's it going, pounding the laps. Now you're trying to find out where are these temps coming from. And even Max said, as you saw him yesterday, write that great piece about dropping down into first gear, a different gear change, trying to find benefits. He's still finding performance, they're still seeking performance. But at the end of the day, I think that the unique thing with Max is he can be quick, he could potentially be winning races and gunning for the championship, but he's not going to be happy about the way it's being done.
It would be such a shame, having watched these cars a lot trackside so far this week, and they do look better, in my opinion. They do look better on track than their Grand Effect predecessors. And a few drivers have backed that up. It would be such a shame if that potential is lost because of everything else that's sort of it's crammed around, or the way that the engines actually operate, the way they have to be operated, whatever sporting situation we end up with twisting the start procedure to make that work, it might just get a little bit over the top. But is this going to come to a head? Because we know that the management of the messaging around 2026 is something that F1's a bit sensitive towards. Max is the most outspoken we've heard so far. Might other drivers follow his lead? And is this all going to come to a head when we get to Australia and the cars are actually unleashed for real, such that unleashing the 2026 cars will be?
Potentially, it could get worse in Melbourne. Melbourne's been one of the most difficult tracks for energy management. There's not many braking places. There's a lot of places you can deploy. So I think they're going to be even more energy starved than they are here when it comes to that lap. And it could well trigger that if the racing isn't very good, if we have a qualifying that's decided by who lifted and coasted for the longest distance going into turn one. Is that Formula One? Are the fans going to like it? And if the drivers don't like it, they're going to be speaking out a lot.